Thank you for joining us for the 2023 City of Ottawa Public Budget Consultation. Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour la consultation publique sur le budget 2023 de la Ville d'Ottawa. Before we begin, it's important to acknowledge that as we gather in person and virtually, we are on the unceded ancestral territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Nous rendons hommage à toutes les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis, leurs aînés, leurs ancêtres et leurs précieuses contributions passées et présentes. Tonight we're joined by the hosts, Councillor Bradley of Gloucester Southgate, Councillor Brockington of River Ward, Councillor Carr of Alta Vista Ward, and Councillor Menard of Capital Ward. Cette consultation budgétaire a été organisée par les conseillers Bradley, Brockington, Carr et Menard. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais aborder quelques détails administratifs. There will be a presentation and answer period at the end of the presentation. I would ask those that are here in person to please wait until the end of the presentation to raise your hand. Il y aura une période de questions et réponses. Pour les gens de la salle, je vous demanderai d'attendre à la fin de la présentation pour soulever vos questions. For those joining virtually, please ensure that your microphones are kept on mute. During the Q&A period, we ask that you please use the chat option to raise your questions. I will read them when it's time. Pour les participants en ligne, assurez-vous que vos microphones sont désactivés. Je demanderai d'utiliser la fonction chat pour poser vos questions. Please note that this event is being recorded. Veuillez prendre note que cette session sera enregistrée. I will now invite each councillor to share their opening remarks, starting with Councillor Bradley. Nous allons maintenant commencer avec des courtes paroles par chaque conseiller. Nous commencerons avec la conseillère Bradley.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for attending tonight's budget consultation. I want to thank my colleagues for co-hosting this event and our collective office staff for organizing the meeting. Thank you to Isabel Jasmine from the city's finance department for leading the presentation, and to our moderator, Kathy Fisher. So tonight we're here to talk about budget 2023. It's a little bit of a backwards process this time around, as normally we consult prior to tabling up the budget. This year, due to the constrained timelines because of the election, we are hosting this meeting after the budget has been tabled. The advantage there is that tonight's presentation will include what's proposed in the draft 2023 budget, including a proposed tax increase of 2.5%. So what I'm hoping to hear tonight, and what I hope to focus on, is what city services, programs, and projects that are important to you and that you'd like to see us continue to invest in. Because at the end of the day, this is a city budget. It should be a reflection of the community's priorities. So I look forward to the discussion, and I think I pass it off to Councillor Brockington. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this year's 2023 budget consultation session. Very happy to see those of you here in person and those who are joining us virtually at home or another location. As Councillor Bradley said, a budget is about prioritization, the prioritization of needs within our communities and within the City of Ottawa. And when you are looking at an operating budget of $4.5 billion and a capital budget of $1.0 billion, it's a significant amount of resources that your city council is tasked with allocating for this particular year. Just last year with the election campaign, I heard from thousands of people in River, literally thousands of people, as we went door to door and we documented what we heard. And it's a great exercise to stay in touch with your residents and understand what the key priorities are. Active transportation, mainly sidewalk renewal, is a key concern across River. We have two neighborhoods in particular up to 80 years old, and infrastructure renewal is top of the priority list. Road renewal obviously is a major concern and issue as well in the ward and across the city of Ottawa. Looking at bringing back Route 3, which used to serve the Prince of Wales corridor, a route that was cut in 2011, and looking at some sort of abbreviated service in that regard. Park amenity renewal, library expansion or library service expansion, particularly in neighborhoods of Carlington and Hunt Club, and looking at the council declared emergencies within within our city. The housing and homeless emergency, as well as climate action, need to be addressed in this year's budget. So it's about priorities. Just because the budget has been, the draft budget's been tabled, does not mean that consultation and input is not, we passed that point, not at all. We need to hear from you tonight and for those at home and through this entire process. So thanks for being here and happy to take questions again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Merci. Now I'll ask Councillor Carr. Sorry,
Bonsoir. Moi, je suis Marie Carr, je suis la conseillère pour Alderista. Je suis très contente d'être ici ce soir comme conseiller. For many years, I participated in these consultations as a community member. So it's a bit of a flip for me to be here tonight as a councillor. I'll echo Councillor Bradley's thoughts, thanking everyone that was here tonight. It's lovely to be able to do things back in person again and be able to talk to people face to face. And with our new hybrid technology to also have that extra accessibility component. For myself, I'm going to echo largely what Councillor Brockington said in terms of some of the priorities that I gathered from the Alta Vista community over the last, year that I would, since I announced that I would start my campaign. I would be remiss not to mention the fact that we are actually in Alta Vista Ward right now. We're at the Heron Road Community Center next to the community of Heron Gate, which I think is really one of the areas that really brought home the affordable housing crisis in this community. And I think that it's something that's really important to everyone around the table. We have gone further and further apart from in a housing situation. The gap between the rich and the poor has grown a lot further. Over the past 3 or 4 years, this ward has consistently opened up at least 2 of its community centers at a time to serve it temporarily as a physical distancing center to house those that are without a home. So currently, Jim Durrell and Genesee Community Center continue to be used. That really highlights the issues that we have in the city. When I was door knocking, I also heard a lot about environmental initiatives, the need for better bike and pedestrian connectivity. The roads and sidewalks are a huge issue in Alta Vista. The mayor himself made a video recording of the condition of the sidewalks and roads on Alta Vista Drive during his campaign. So it was a little bit of a surprise when I opened up the road renewal section of the budget book, and there's not, I'm one of the wards that has absolutely nothing in there for Ward 18. So obviously we can't do everything in 1 year, but those remain concerns to me. Other concerns I heard in our community centers, this is an old school. It was converted many, many years ago. It doesn't meet all the accessibility requirements. A lot of recreational facilities in Alta Vista are aging. Our hallmark for community buildings is the cinder block field house. So lots of things. Transit's a big concern. I used to take transit every day. I don't really take it as much anymore just because of the reliability issues. So those are some things I've heard from the community. I know there's a lot more. I encourage you, those that don't get your questions in tonight that are from my ward or any other ward, to include me in your emails to my office about your priorities. And thank you again for being here tonight. And I'll pass it off to Councillor Menard to come up.
Thanks very much, Marty, and nice to see everybody here. Good to be back in person, and I just want to thank our teams who set up everything tonight. So they were here early at 4:15, 4:30, setting up the room and getting the hybrid system set up as well. So to everybody online, nice to see you as well. Thanks for joining us. I guess one thing I wanted to talk about, my colleagues talked a lot about priorities and saying hello. I just want to make sure we talk about process a little bit too. So this budget is obviously an expedited one because the election happens, and in future years it will be like that. One of the things that the council had talked about in the governance review is how to have a better budget process. So how can people input better early on before the budget is drafted? What kind of forums do we want to have for consultation that aren't just right when the budget happens, but earlier on? So if you have ideas about those things, how community groups and yourself can get activated and into that city budget with finance staff very early on and councils early on. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that tonight as well. I'm the chair of the environment committee at the City of Ottawa, and so one thing I'm happy to see in the budget is finally we have some base funding for climate initiatives. So that never existed before. We relied on the Hydro Ottawa Dividend Surplus, which was varying year to year. I'm happy to see some base funding there and build on that in future years. So I'll leave it there and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, councillors. Merci à tous les conseillers. Next, we're going to move to the presentation. We have Isabelle Jasmine, the Deputy City Treasurer, who will present the City of Ottawa 2023 budget. Welcome, Isabelle. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. Alors, nous allons maintenant procéder avec une présentation sur le budget 2023 par Isabelle Jasmine, la trésorière adjointe de la Ville d'Ottawa. Merci, Isabelle, pour votre présence ce soir. À vous.
Isabelle Jasmine, en français. Je m'appelle Jasmine.
Jasmine.
So good evening. My name is Isabelle Jasmine, and I'm the Deputy City Treasurer for Corporate Finance. Today I'm here representing the City of Ottawa Finance Services Department to provide an overview of the budget process. There's an overarching framework for determining how much needs to be collected from taxes to pay for city services. To ensure that the budget remains affordable, the best place to plan is start with the tax target. The city estimates and determines any increases to expenditures resulting from inflation, increases from collective agreements, changes in regulation, legislation, growth to service to new neighborhoods, and changes in funding from other levels of government. These are then offset by savings from efficiencies that can be achieved from operations, increases in revenues from fees that are charged directly to users of city services, and taxes from new assessment that particularly help to pay for the increased operating and infrastructure costs to service new neighborhoods. So in 2023, the total draft operating budget for the city is $4.5 billion. Much of the operating budget, nearly 60%, is made up of 4 key services, which are water and sewer, police services, transit, and community and social services. As you will see on the next slide, much of the cost of these services come from sources other than tax. For example, water and sewer is paid for by revenue from water bills. Half of transit, actually it's less now, transit operating costs are paid for by fare revenue, closer to 39% now with reductions in ridership. And over 80% of community and social services are paid for by provincial and federal funding. Next slide. So here you can see that 50% of the revenue comes from taxes and payments in lieu of taxes. 23% comes from federal and provincial grants, and 22% comes from fees and charges. For example, the water bill, transit fares, parks, and recreational fees, etc. For 2023, the draft capital budget is $1.06 billion. The high asset intensive areas are primarily for water and sewer services, transit and transportation, which includes roads, and the bulk of the capital budget for tax supported services is for the renewal and replacement of aging infrastructure. The remainder is for growth, for new infrastructure, which is primarily funded by development charges. As you can see in this graph, 62.5% of capital funding comes from cash reserves, which are put aside as a capital contribution from the operating budget. The remainder of the capital program is funded by debt, funding from other levels of government, and development charges. This slide highlights the fact that there is very little discretion to reduce spending for many of the city's services. The police budget is tabled separately, and council does not have discretion to make line item changes. They can only approve or reject the budget in its entirety. Budget reductions in other areas like transit, fire, paramedics, and roads must be accompanied by changes in service standards. There's also a long list of services or expenditures where there is no discretion because these services are mandated or regulated or mandatory, such as long-term care, public health, housing, and the debt charges. There is little more discretion in areas funded by fees, where the fees can be increased to recover the cost of delivering the service, or in areas where there are no specific service standards or for administrative support services. So council approved the budget directions for 2023, which are summarized here. Municipal tax target is set at 2.5%, overall, including citywide levy of 2.5%, our police services levy of the same 2.5%, and the transit levy of 2.5%. Annual additional taxation revenues from growth is forecasted at 2.2%. The rate programs increased revenue by 4.2% overall as per the long-range financial plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater. User fees and charges increased in accordance with the fiscal framework. for the long-range financial plan, including incremental COVID-19 cost recovery, is built in primarily now for transit. In earlier years, we were recovering for some of the municipal services like recreational areas that were closing down some of their facilities. The biggest impact right now still remaining for COVID is transit. The capital budget is developed in accordance with direction outlined in the 2019 BC background study, which shows the growth projects in 10-year plan. This slide highlights the steps and timelines for the 2023 budget process. Because of the 2022 election, timeline differs from the typical process you would see in other years. The budget directions report was approved on December 7th, 2022. All budgets were tabled on February 1st, 2023. In February 2023, individual budgets for each committee, board, and commission will be reviewed. At these meetings, the public has the opportunity to provide feedback and input on the budget via public delegation. Individual committees have the flexibility to make recommendations to make budget changes that can be funded from reductions in other committee budgets. Budget will be approved as a whole on March 1st, 2023. This is a list. Oh, sorry. So this is a list of the budget meetings at which public delegations can provide input and recommendations. The list can be found on the city's website and is updated if there are any changes made to dates. Slide. So there's several resources available to you and ways that you can provide input to the budget throughout the year. Engage Ottawa provides a comprehensive online engagement platform that allows you to connect with the city in an interactive manner. To provide input, you can complete the online survey or contact your council. You can also get additional information on the city's website at ottawa.ca/budget. All feedback is reviewed and considered. Your participation in this public meeting today is greatly appreciated. And I look forward to answering any questions you may have on this presentation.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Or is it up?
I think we did that the last time as well. Thank you for that, for this interesting presentation. Merci, Zélie, pour votre présentation. We're now going to proceed to the question and answer period. What we're going to do is we're going to alternate between taking questions from the folks in the audience, and then we're also going to be taking some questions from the folks who are online. So I'll take a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll take 2 questions online. And we'll invite folks who are online just to pose their questions in the chat section. Alors, ce qu'on va faire, c'est que nous allons demander aux gens qui sont présents ici de poser leurs questions en levant leur main. Et puis, nous allons demander aux gens qui participent en ligne de poser leurs questions en utilisant la fonction chat. So, we are open for questions. And what I suggest, councillors, you may either want to stay in your seat, or I can leave the slide and you can just come up and in the event that a question is posed directly to you. So I'm going to move the slide, but I'm already. So we have a question from the audience. Mr. Reid.
Thank you very much. Can people online hear this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have some figures, so I'm going to have to refer to notes to get that clear. Thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it. I think we all want Ottawa to be a great place to live. But with inflation at 6.3% on top of the long-term record of budget constraints in the long term, the proposed budget is not delivering. Other Ontario communities recognize the reality of the iron fist of unpalatable inflation. For 2023, Toronto is proposing a 5.5% increase. Hamilton is looking at 6.9%, Kitchener 4.8%, and Windsor 5.2%. So why would Ottawa's situation be so different? Those communities look at efficiencies too. The budget documents show that over the past 10 years, from 2012 to 2022, Ottawa's compounded total increase in property taxes was 22.3%. That's compared to 24.9% for Toronto, and an average of around 40% for Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. So what are the consequences of that? Others are pointing out multiple problems, like affordable housing and the climate emergency. You, Council, could and should do something and have the fortitude to do more with more. As a library service advocate, I see no provision for improving library service to our legacy underserved areas with the neediest populations. Opening facility service level, currently 1/3 of a square foot per capita for urban Ottawa, has a goal of half a square foot per capita. And that itself is half the recommended by the American Library Association. There's a maxim credited to Benjamin Franklin: the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten. The budget digs us further into a service quality hole. And the first law of holes is when you're in one to stop digging. So will you, councillors? Thank you.
So as your councillor, I'll take the lead here and answer it first. Thank you, John. Your advocacy is well known and well appreciated, and we need community leaders like yourself to advocate on a number of fronts in addition to library services. In my opinion, a balance is about a balance of priorities. The list of needs far exceeds the city's ability to service or pay for all those. And so it's up to your elected reps to prioritize that and come to a balanced budget that we have now. Revenues are not just property taxes. We look at new growth that's happening now as new developments come online. They start to pay property taxes. And in 2023, the estimate is more generous or better than in past years. So when you blend or add those two components together, you get more taxes that are available to service the needs of the people along. So every municipality is different. I don't know the situations in the other municipalities, but we're certainly well aware of what they're proposing for their tax rates. And let's not ignore the fact that the city, this term of council, is going to have some significant issues to address: the cost of Bill 23, the cost that the federal government no longer wants to contribute to the same degree taxes in lieu of paying property tax for their properties. The transit revenue that the deputy treasurer has said we still have to find a way to cover off $30 million hole in this coming budget year, in addition to all the other priorities and emergencies that we've declared. So the needs, like I said, feel infinite sometimes, and it's our job working with community leaders and our community as a whole is to try and address the main or the top priorities through budgets and look for other ways to deal with all the other stuff. But doesn't mean I fully support or endorse every budget, because I don't think they cover off everything that exists. You're trying to do that hard work to get that addressed as much as possible. So that's my 2 cents worth on that matter, but thank you for your question.
Can I just say, sure. I'll just add something, and I totally appreciate the point that we need to have higher revenues. And you mentioned other municipalities that are increasing property taxes. And when I was speaking to residents a lot, there was a lot of sentiment that, you know, property taxes are very much a regressive form of taxation, unlike other forms of taxation. And I personally think that we really start to need to look at more user-based revenue. And I think probably the vacant unit tax was designed to be that way. Unfortunately, the administrative burden of it, the way the rollout wasn't probably ideal. But I really think, you know, what I'd like to see over my term in council is really looking at those more progressive forms of taxation that can help build the revenue base. And I just wanted to add that in response to the fact that you talked about other municipalities. So it's really difficult, and then Councillor Brocky can explain the situation we're in, but I'm hoping in this term of council, and I've asked the finance department sort of what they're looking at in terms of increasing that, and I that's what I'd like to see personally myself in the long run, is moving towards that more user base. Just wanted to add that, sorry.
I just wanted to touch on, Mr. Reed, I know that you're a big advocate for library services, and we had the opportunity to talk briefly at the orientation. So as a new library board trustee, I did want to say that I did have a meeting with library staff today to raise the concerns that you brought to my attention. I know we are making some investments in library services with our new Associate branch, as well as Riverside South and Barbican. So there are some investments in library services coming. I know it doesn't necessarily touch on the communities that that you referenced, but just to say that we are making investments in library services in our communities. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Should I stand up?
Sure, please.
Okay, so my name is Angela Calabresa. Thank you very much for this consultation. Thank you, councilors, for being with us and the virtual people for coming. So a couple of points. First of all, I think there's many really nice, good things in this budget and budget process. So I'm delighted to see the climate lens on the capital items. It's something that we've been asking for a long time, and we'll be obviously following up to see some of the data, but that's great. We're happy, so happy to see climate actually on the budget, as to just having a great plan, right? So very, very cool. In terms of your question of how can we have a more transparent participatory process, I think earlier on in the year, which is when some of the real decisions start to be contemplated, so participatory budget, there are many different cities around the world that actually allow citizens to say, this is what we want. So I'm wondering if like it used to be that councillors get like a small pittance that you spend on like speed bumps or something, or a little paint on the road. Is it possible to make those envelopes a bit bigger and then have a participatory consultation in the board where people say, hey, let's have a discussion. Yes, we want this money to go towards that. Forced expansion of our urban boundary and the loss of development charges poses a whole bunch of problems. So I'm wondering can we use budgetary instruments to slow down on funding the expansion in infrastructure, which sprawl really needs? And a better, greener, carbon neutral standard? And can we address those things in terms of where the city is going?
So just to start with your last question first, on the urban boundary expansion, some of what the official plan changes that impact the province brought on us, and also the ultimate piece. There are ways that the city can ensure that we're developing the way we want to, more efficient. Of course, sprawl is extremely expensive for our city. And that has to do mostly with the water infrastructure that exists in those new lands that were added. Most of the new lands that were added, all the new lands the province added, did not have pre-existing infrastructure that will have to be added. And so the way the city goes about that is, well, what's our priority for adding water, sewer infrastructure? Is it going to be in those greenfield lands, or are we going to be prioritizing more infill development, which the official plan is saying we want to move towards? And of course, the new zoning bylaw review that comes will have a big say in that as well, in terms of what our R1 and R2 world looks like. So, though that's when I asked city staff that same question around infrastructure to mitigate the effects of sprawl and some of the loss of DCs that'll come until 23. They mentioned the official plan changes anyway that water infrastructure is our biggest lever in gating some of those lands that may be undesirable to develop for our city based on what the new required of staff, we passed a motion that tasked staff with reviewing, they review it. And it came back that there were some concerns that they had, and it mostly related to what current budgets do we exist in council now that you can use for budgeting, and also some equity issues that they were pointing out in terms of who shows up and how they show up to make those decisions. I think there's ways we can mitigate that, and just square budget works very well in many different cities and countries across the world. So it's still something to keep pushing on, I think, as a new process. But I will just address your comment around the funds that we have, the small funds that we have. So there's really two areas that exist for councillors. One, cash and blue account, archives. So the funds that would be there for developments that could put up the required amount of park rent would go into that fund. In Capital Ward, we do a participatory process. So we bring all the community associations together and the representatives there and say, look, this is what the funds we have and who has needs based on equity considerations in the ward. And that's how we're funding the Heron Park community building that's going to be built, and parts of Windsor Park Fieldhouse, and parts of the Lee playground. And those things were decided collectively through a participatory process that they input on and have a say in where those funds go. The second one is traffic calming budget. So there has been an increase to traffic calming. And in this budget, I'm not sure how it's rolling out, if it's direct to councillors or if there's the same budget for us this year as in previous years with an idea that it would increase in the future. Well, probably no. But in any event, that's another fund that can be used in a participatory way. And so, it's hard though, because every street that requires it to flyer that street to talk to every single person there is a lot of work. For what might just be select stage, things like that might be needed. And so, certainly we go to the community association and talk about the plans that we've got, but it's not as easy a task given the resources that we have to do every single street on a speed hump. And we do consult wherever possible, but those two funds are areas that can be utilized for more participatory actions within council budgets.
And I'll come back to you, actually take a couple of questions from online. Andrew, can you read the first question?
I certainly can. So question from Ross McLeod.
The record, so I can. I don't know, Andrew, do you want me to wait till we get back online?
We're back on.
Hear me online, hopefully.
We're still online.
So I would like to see us look at that budget a little more in depth in terms of the capital investment for the new facility. A few of my colleagues had talked about that. It was deferred and delayed for a while, and now we've got it back on the books. I would like to see maybe a different deployment model of police. Why are we so reliant on bricks and mortar? Is there a different way of doing it? Is there a more cost-effective way of doing it? It's now time to make that investment. So I guess I'll just leave it there, but no, I'm not supportive of the 2.5%.
Yeah, and I can speak to a little bit about the increase for the police budget. Since 2016, increasingly the police budget has taken up an increasingly smaller amount by percentage of the city budget. I am on the police services board. I can't speak to my role on that board here tonight. It's a different mandate than being a city councillor. We do have, you can look at Statistics Canada, we do have one of the lowest rates of police officers per capita in the country. And I will say that as much as I hear at the police services board, concerns about people that come and delegate, when I knock doors or when I talk in the community, there is a tremendous amount of folks in Ward 18 that have expressed the need for more police services. I hosted a community safety night a few weeks ago in Elmdale. There's another one coming up in Canterbury. I think we need to be judicious in terms of how we spend that money. I think the police services board needs to play a big role in asking questions about where that money is being spent, how it's being deployed. I don't like to play either or statements. I think we need to advocate for better social services overall. There's a bigger commitment to affordable housing. We've got councillors who are very dedicated to that. I'm not a fan of saying, you know, let's not help people, let's not help immigrants because we have to help our vets. Let's take away money from here to there. I think that we need, as councillors, we're responsible for advocating where the needs are. We are working, there is a guiding council that's putting in place. The pilots are scheduled to come out next year in 2024, where we'll have better mental health response. It won't be just the police. That work is ongoing. I met with social services this week. So these things are happening, they are in play. Unfortunately, they do also cost money. And so the police budget includes support. Right now, they are the ones that are funding that alternate response. It's not being funded hardly at all by the city, presently by the city's own budget. So there's those sort of things that we have to look at. Right now, there's a pilot that's been happening with the paramedics. It was paid for by the province with the police, and that has been incredibly successful. So I think, you know, am I supportive? I'm supportive of having the best resources that are deployed so that we have the best services for what we have. You know, there's lots of social services improvements that are coming this year. Do we need more? Absolutely, because we have that delta between the more marginalized and the most rich that has really grown since the pandemic. But I think, you know, overall, we have to, as councillors, we have
the lowest crime statistics per person in Ottawa. Across the country, and the fact of the matter. So I think on the police service. So I think those are the types of tasks we need to look at.
As a whole or reject it as a whole. And so even if there's a small budget component that we would like to modify, we are not permitted to move those amendments at budget time. So even more important, while the Police Services Board is meeting, they'll meet through their Finance and Audit Committee meeting to make tweaks or changes to the budget now before a final budget is presented to City Council. As I said during the campaign, we really in our community have to have a discussion. What services do we want the police to provide us? Don't start with in my opinion, don't start by let's cut. Let's all agree on what the services we want our police to provide. Cost that out. Are you willing to pay for that type of service? There also needs to be an evolution of the Ottawa Police Service and the services they provide. And I think we all agree a greater reliance and investment on social services that can help people. And the police are not always the right body to come. When I look at 2.5%, and I see most of that is for contractually obligated collective agreement